Hey there guys, thanks for tuning in. So today I'm just going to be sharing with you part 2 of the talk I did for the creative writing group. So this one's all about focus, concentration, flow states, avoiding writer's block. Hopefully this is something some of you will find interesting. A few people had asked me to do a video on concentration, and that is something I'm going to be delving into in more detail in future, but for now hopefully you can glean something from this. So yeah, the format is a bit different from my usual video here, but don't worry, I've got more of the usual videos on the way. I'm doing a workout video based on Arrow. I'm doing a big video on Nootropics, and in fact going forward I'm going to be taking every single Monday off for the coming weeks in order to focus purely on the Bioneer. So there should be a lot of cool stuff on the way. Please subscribe if you'd like to be involved with that. Thanks a ton for watching as always, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now. Yeah, so I was thinking now I'd go on and talk a little bit about how I maintain my high output, because I think that's something people are slightly interested in, because maybe some of you struggle to find the time to do the writing that you want to do. So yeah, like I say, I currently write 10 to 30,000 words a day. That was a rare thing. Normally 10,000. I was writing 10,000 words a day, and then I had the option to work with Android Authority. And instead of doing the sensible thing and cutting my work in half, I decided that I would do that as well until 1 p.m. and then I'd do my 10,000 words in the 4 remaining hours of the day, which was ambitious, but it's so far worked out. I'm kind of burning out. I'm going to take Mondays off in future to just work on my own projects, and then hopefully that'll help me to take off there. But yeah, so there's a few things that I've found useful to this end. One of them is I always work in cafes. I don't know if anyone else does that. I think it would be an even more romantic image for a creative writer rather than a copywriter, but I like the idea of sitting in a cafe.
When you go to a cafe, what are they actually doing?
Yeah, well there's students and there's also people like me. I was in the Bodleian Library in Oxford the other day, and there was a sign saying no laptops allowed, because yeah, some people like you because you go there on a regular basis and you buy lots of coffee, and some people hate you because you take up their seats. I think it depends on how busy they are. I've recently moved to Bicester out of London, and it's a bit harder to find coffee shops there. But if you can go to a coffee shop, it's so much better for concentration. Like if you're struggling to find the motivation in the evening for half an hour to write a chapter of your book or whatever, then that would be a really good stop off on the way home. If you've got a good laptop sitting there with a coffee, because you've got no distractions. Because obviously I work from home otherwise permanently, and it can be, and if I don't work, then I don't get paid. So I really need to not be, watching TV or playing computer games, and so going to a coffee shop helps me to do that. And even because I can obviously play computer games on my laptop, but you feel self-conscious if someone looks over your shoulder and they're like, that guy has just sat there for 3 hours playing games on his laptop. So that really helps. And also the noise in the background is actually quite useful. The background chatter, because that becomes like white noise, as long as you don't accidentally overhear a really interesting conversation, which does. Yeah, I've heard people breaking up. That would be good for inspiration for creative writers. Breaking up, interviews, yeah, all sorts of things. And I always watch the interviews and think, I'm so glad I'm not you. Get a bit of Schadenfreude there. But yeah, in general, normally it just becomes a kind of background chatter, and that's really useful for drowning out everything else. And another tip you can use for that same effect is to put on headphones, obviously, with noise cancelling ideally. But play a single album or a few tracks that you like and have them on repeat. And this is something that apparently Matt Mullenweg, or Mullenweg, I'm not sure how you say it, he's the creator of WordPress, and he said he uses this when coding. And the reason that's effective is because it's got the beat and it kind of keeps you awake and interested, but at the same time, because it's repeating over and over, you eventually become desensitized to it. You kind of tune it out. It becomes like the ticking of a clock. And so if the only thing you can hear is something you've tuned out, you've actually it's kind of like sensory deprivation. You now don't have, as far as your brain is aware, you've got nothing coming in through your ears. And some of my most focused moments have been doing that. When I've really got to work, I put on one album, which is Rocky IV, Vance DeCola, the synth bits, and I just listen to that on repeat, and then I can focus without kind of any distraction, as long as there's not something too exciting going on in the coffee shop. But that's a tip you can use. Another one I find quite useful, and I don't know, this could apply to you guys. When I have to write something the next day and I know what it is, I'll often start it just a tiny bit before I end the day. And so that kind of goes against conventional wisdom, because they tend to say, people tend to assume you should try and finish everything at the end of the day. But if you leave something unfinished, it's kind of human nature to feel a bit itchy and uncomfortable about that. You want it finished. So it tends to be that when you then go and sit down, the first thing you'll do is just finish that thing, because it's open and it's going. I find that quite effective, especially if it's something I don't want to write. And also psychologically, so often my orders are broken down into I'll have to do 10 blog posts, 400 words, and that sounds like a lot. That's 4,000 words. But if I do 3 of them, then that's 7 blog posts, which is just over half of them left, and I can kind of talk it through in my head. It seems a lot easier, and it tends to go so much faster when you think of it as easier versus when you think of it as a big kind of wall that you've got to complete in that sense.
Hemingway, he always said that was one of his best tips, was to always finish where you kind of know what the next line's going to be, or the next kind of bit, so that you don't have to wake up and start with the blank page.
Yeah, so that
kind of be ready to go.
Yeah, so I didn't know he did that as well. He also wrote Standing Up, didn't he, Hemingway?
Oh, really?
I think so.
He did a lot,
Yeah, so you can get those standing desks now, and they say that's good for creativity, etc. Yeah, that really wouldn't work for me, I think, because I get so focused I need to be sat down. But I think if you're not chasing word count, then perhaps that would be a more effective way. Definitely getting up and taking breaks in between and giving yourself the breaks is super important. That's something that I have to do, because obviously I in theory can earn like an unlimited amount by just not sleeping or socializing. So you have to be quite strict with yourself and say this is the time off, and that makes a massive difference when you then go back into it the next day, because if you don't give yourself the time off, then you won't be recharged, and you'll kind of be burned out as you even start. I drink a lot of coffee to get through, and that's not ideal really, because this is increasing dopamine and adrenaline, etc. And you can easily reach adrenal fatigue, especially if you've got a huge workload and you're just working as hard and as fast as you can, and you don't take the break. Eventually you can keep it up for a couple of days, and then you start to feel the burnout, and that's when you get ill, and then that's when your productivity really does suffer. But I don't imagine that's a problem a lot of people have with creative writing, probably.
Yeah, actually,
Really?
I find I just forget to drink water.
Yeah, well that's...
And then by the time I realize I'm about to fall onto the desk, and it's like, why? It's like I just haven't had a glass of water in the last 3 hours sitting here, and it's, you start to get more and more tired, but you ignore it because you're into it, don't you? So,
Yeah.
And then there's that you do wonder, it's like, why can't I come up with a single sentence now that makes sense? And it's like, I guess you are just exhausted.
Yeah. Well,
I do have reminders sometimes that I do that throughout my working day anyways.
Yeah, set reminders to kind of get up.
Actually that had it made a water noise. It's like a kind of like a noise of the water filling up every once in a while.
Yeah.
You get up and do it. But talking about Hemingway, actually Einstein used to say that you had to lie down. It didn't matter how you would do the research first, and then you lie down, you rested. He had a nap, and then he would wake up and carry on working.
Well, lying down, they say, is good for if you're in a more supine position. It's better for creativity, because when you're very focused and very stressed, creativity actually goes down. You release more dopamine and adrenaline, etc. You get a kind of tunnel vision, and obviously the purpose of that from an evolutionary perspective is to avoid danger, etc., and run away. Whereas when you're relaxed, you have a more your brain is allowed to wander. So you have and they say there's no such thing as creativity. It's just the combination of 2 existing ideas. So obviously, the more you relax and the more your mind wanders, the more likely you are to see 2 disparate ideas and then connect them, and that way creativity happens. So actually, the more wired you are and the more focused, you actually can lose creativity. So a lot of people who will take kind of amphetamine type things to try and boost their productivity, that actually might be losing a bit of creativity in the process. So yeah, it kind of makes sense. And it could almost make sense to kind of split your creative thinking and your output almost, so that you come up with the ideas when you're relaxed and then you output it later on. Because another tip I have for avoiding writer's block is sometimes I know I'm going to be struggling with a topic, not just because I don't know the subject, but because I've got no interest in it or no angle. So I'll kind of write it in my head when I'm not sat down, so that when I come to write it, I'm ready, kind of thing. So if I'm walking somewhere, or if I'm sleeping or driving, I'll think, what's the angle? How will I open it? What will my opening line be? What's the rough structure and the conclusion? And then if you come up with that idea as you're kind of moving around and traveling, what have you, then when you sit down to actually write it, it's already there, and you don't have that kind of, a blank page kind of feeling. And that can definitely help, I would imagine, with creative writing as well. And something else kind of related is that if it's a really dull topic that I just have no interest in writing, then I always try and come up with a way to, that's when you tend to get writer's block because it's not interesting to you. So I'll come up with a way to make it interesting to myself. So for instance, if it's something like car windshields, which I did have to write about when I started out, that's the most boring, for car windshield companies, I guess, auto glass replaced type thing. So what I would do is I'd think about the time that my windshield got cracked and then write a kind of personal account of that, or I'd write about say some other aspect of a long journey that I find more interesting, like car sickness, because that kind of relates to my interest in health, etc. And it's kind of still linked, and it's still okay as far as the client's concerned, as long as you link it back to what they're selling. But it's something that I find more interesting, and I know that that's a tip that some creative writers follow as well. Because say you're really stuck and you've been stuck on this scene that you don't want to write, then often they say that actually the reason you don't want to write it is because you find it boring, and it might be an exposition scene, or it might be just a really dull scene, and it's like if you're too bored to write it, then that doesn't bode very well for the readers. So actually, instead of trying to force yourself through it, what you should do is try and reframe it so you're excited to write it. Whether that means basing this on a moving train or something and they're on the roof, I don't know, but just instead of forcing yourself, say maybe the problem is the project, and that needs to be more interesting. Because what you were describing about not going to the toilet and stuff, they would call that a flow state, ironically. So a flow state is when you're so focused on something that you go into that tunnel vision. And they say that actually neurologically it's called temporohypofrontality, which means that your prefrontal cortex, the planning and the anxiety part of your brain is actually closed down, and you've gone into a pure kind of response. I don't know fully how that works, because obviously if you're writing, you would need your planning aspect, but they say that it's the same thing, and it's the same thing as when you're like snowboarding, or when something falls out your cupboard and you catch it really quickly, or when you're in conversation and you forget how long you've been talking for because you're so fascinated.
Also, a lot of artists just taking drugs.
Yeah, that's probably
to eliminate some of that other noise and just
get
into flow, which I'm not advocating, but Hemingway said write drunk, edit sober, which doesn't mean you have to be drunk, but just figuring out when is it that you're in that state, whether it's walking down the street and you're just kind of, because you're paying attention, and finding when that zone is.
Yeah, exactly. And there are obviously non-drug ways that you can achieve similar sort of things. I think Tim Ferriss drinks yerba mate tea, or yerba mate, I don't know how you say it, but that contains caffeine and L-theanine and I think theobromine. And Darwin drank that, and he apparently called it the world's most perfect stimulant, and that's for too long. Ah, cool. Yeah, so the L-theanine takes... The drug bit, yeah, it's auto-censor feature. So that makes you less anxious, etc., while still having the stimulatory effect. So these are called nootropics. That's a whole extra subject that you can use to increase your focus, but you have to be very careful because some of them are not good. My advice... It's like caffeine. Exactly, and it can cause permanent changes in the brain. A lot of them have claimed to have no side effects, but I'd take that with a pinch of salt. But my advice for something like that would be just nutrition. Eating a lot of these nootropics turn out to just be basic things you can get in your diet anyways. Like, for instance, lutein is found in carrots and things, and that's been shown recently to increase your retention of ideas. And you don't need, and vitamin B6 and B12 are good for energy, and all these things. So if you just eat a good nutritious meal, that'll actually provide you with the energy and the building blocks that your brain needs. And I mean, a lot of these neurotransmitters I'm talking about, they are produced by various different vitamins, etc. That's what they're made out of. So you don't need to be buying anything off the internet. You can just eat well, smoothies, etc. And something we were talking about, I said a lot of people say they don't have time to write, or they don't have time to build their own business, etc. But I find it doesn't tend to come down to time. It tends to come much more down to energy. So you actually have the time. You get home in the evenings, but you just would rather watch TV or whatever, and that's just because you're burned out. So instead of trying to make more time, you should focus on making more energy, whether that means being a little bit less stressed at work, or whether that means changing the time of day you write. So maybe in the morning before you're tired out. For me, I'm always trying to juggle the work I'm doing for these clients with my own website, which is really what I want to grow and promote over time. And kind of, it's very easy after you've spent a whole day writing that number of words to not want to do the next bit. So I need to like make sure I leave a bit of energy in the tank, or do it first in the day. And obviously I like going to the gym as well. I always make sure I do that first, because if I leave it till the evening, then it often doesn't happen. So yeah, I would say prioritize. If you really want to do the writing, then prioritize it and put it towards the start of the day instead of towards the end, or maybe even, you know, say no to some other things, which could mean missing out on opportunity or whatever. But I guess you can't do everything, unfortunately. There does come a point where you know, obviously build the energy with the right nutrition and sleep, etc. But then as well, make sure you give yourself a time in the day where you do have that energy and you're ready to work, and know yourself in that regard as well. So yeah, and obviously something else that can help is the right hardware. And for me, I use a mechanical keyboard with cherry blue MX switches, and I've recently upgraded to this, and I've done my research, and apparently it can help to reduce RSI, and it's more satisfying to type on. And
What is a mechanical? Sorry, you mean, what are you talking about?
Uh, so this is the keyboard,
Yeah.
but the switch means that when you press the button down, it kind of clicks more instead of just
Like the
bottoming
old
out.
school ones.
Yes, it is like the old school ones. Yeah, and they say that's better for a writer, and that switch in particular, they say, is the writer's switch. It's really loud and clicky, so if you plan to write at night, it's not terribly effective. And I have a wider monitor now, which they say can boost productivity by 30%. I'm not sure about that, but if you are researching, it's very useful to be able to have potentially 3 windows open, like what you're writing, your notes, and then, you know, the website that you're researching from at the same time. For in the coffee shops, I use a Surface Pro, which is really useful because you can carry it around. It's very light, etc. I've also just got myself. But I do post images of it all the time. I should be getting paid for them. And I got a GPD Pocket recently, which is a laptop that's kind of that big, so you can literally take it anywhere with you and write wherever you are, which I think is as well a useful thing to be able to do.
What brand is that? GPD?
It's the GPD Pocket, and it's a Chinese brand, I think, and I found it on Kickstarter, no Indiegogo, so it's kind of like, it's not terribly mainstream, but you can buy it on Amazon, etc. now. But
Like something out of the chocolate factory.
yeah, it's a funny looking thing as well. And I've got a little folding keyboard I use as well for when I really want to write something down. Because, you know, as I was saying, as you walk around, it's a good time to come up with ideas. And if you're worried you're going to forget some, then being able to just jot it down quickly is always very useful.
I guess with touch screen, because I do use my phone a lot. I don't find it as satisfying as writing with a pen.
Yeah.
I feel like with the flow state that you were talking about earlier, for me it's a lot easier to get if I'm handwriting.
Oh, that's interesting.
My hand gets very tired, so there's an element as to I actually run out of steam with my
Yeah.
hand.
I handwrite first, then type it up.
Yeah, I've actually been really interested to try and find something that I can write into and then have it converted. These things do exist, smart pens, but I don't think any of them have massively taken off yet.
Good product, the Lenovo Yoga series.
Oh yeah.
So it's two-sided
Oh,
tablet.
is it? Yeah.
And does it have? Is it the one with the screen at the bottom?
Pen,
Yeah.
Oh, really?
and then it converts.
Oh, okay.
Handwriting, it converts it to
Have you had to go with it?
text. I haven't, but my partner needs one for her job.
Yeah.
Spent a bit of time researching the whole market.
Yeah.
This one seems like the best.
Oh, that's cool then. Well, yeah.
How much are they?
It's the same as ours. It's a Lenovo, and it's the Yoga series.
The yoga.
I think it's Yoga 10.
I like the name already. I think.
Are
Yeah.
they expensive?
You can get it on staff discount at the moment.
Oh, really?
The last email about the BBC rewards.
Oh, really?
It's about half the price of Amazon by the staff.
They're gonna wonder why
rewards email.
they had so many like
But
yoga.
but let me buy one first, right?
Yeah, that sounds really cool.
Them and say get a bit of commission on that. It sounds good actually.
Actually, you're saying that writing by hand, it kind of makes sense as well, because I think one more way to potentially get into a flow state is to get kind of immediate feedback. That's one of the reasons I like my keyboard, is because it creates lights and it has that nice clicky noise. Yes?
Oh yeah, Woody Allen uses a typewriter.
Does he? Yeah, it's funny, isn't it, how something like that can make a big difference to how it feels to write. But yeah, because I find when I'm programming or when I'm video editing, which I now do a fair bit for Android Authority, it's much easier to get into that kind of flow state where you forget to do other things and you forget to eat, etc. And I think the reason for that is that you're getting the immediate feedback of like, edit, watch it back, it's not right, edit, watch it back, and you always think, oh, just one more little chunk and then it'll be done. Same with programming, you kind of try and fix a bug, test it, doesn't work, try it again, test it, doesn't work. So I think with writing, I try and do that as well. That's one reason I always try and break it into small chunks in my head so I can like write that off, that's done, that's done. And something else I often do is like watch the word count in particular. And that's an app I've been thinking of making as well, is like trying to make writing more like gamified. You know, gamification is where you get rewards and things, and it feels more rewarding to do it. But yeah, in terms of like the focus and the dopamine, I think that's a good way of getting you more. Yeah, I think a flow state really comes from when you just really love what you're doing, or you find it really interesting, because like that's you telling your brain like, this is important, I need to focus, kind of thing. It's not life or death, but it is something that's important to my long-term goals. So I guess it's just like, if you're not focused, if you really love what you're doing, and if it's like a story or topic that you're passionate about, then hopefully it should be relatively easier to get into that state, versus if it's something that you're kind of forcing yourself to do because you think you need to do it, or because you've got a client who is obstinate.